Hello, everyone. LC Holt here, and this is my update for what will be June the 1st. So, we're already out of May, and today, continuing in our exploration of the Scream franchise, started last week, we're going to be talking about Scream 3 and Scream 4. Joining me, some very special guests. One of them, as you can see, is Ghostface himself. Is it Ghostface?
With a baby.
What?
No. No, it's Mike Bama. Of course, Mike Bama. He was the killer all along. We knew it. I knew it anyway. And of course, joining us yet again, Chaney Morrow from the films Haunt and the upcoming Wrong Turn remake, Wrong Turn Foundation. Rebecca Ivey, my irreplaceable co-host. So,
Yay.
and also, Chaney and I will be appearing pretty soon in the film On Location. How could I forget to mention that? So a little shout out to On Location, written and directed by Jeff Seidman, to be shooting shortly. But jumping into the topic of what today's film is going, or today's show is going to be about, let's talk about the man who, in my estimation anyway, created the Scream mythology, and that's Kevin Williamson. He plays a big part in the story of Scream 3 especially. Because after the success of the first two Scream movies, he became a hot commodity. They called him the golden child because every script he wrote seemed to be made of gold. It was produced and it made money. You know, movies like I Know What You Did Last Summer, The Faculty, shows like Dawson's Creek.
I remember teaching Mrs. Tingle, too. Remember, I think he even wrote and directed that, didn't he?
He did, yes. And that has to do with this quite a bit, too, because he was about to direct Teaching Mrs. Tingle when the idea of doing Scream 3 came up. And he was also developing a TV show called Wasteland, which was short-lived, but he was hard at work on it. Because of all of these writing assignments, he had gone from being basically a nobody to being a multimillionaire pretty much over the course of a year, based on these writing assignments after Scream. He found himself in a situation where he was a little too busy to stop everything and work on Scream 3, the screenplay. He had talked later in his life about his, when he was in his peak, his creative peak, and when he was getting all these jobs. His life, he said, had devolved into basically staying awake for a few hours, writing on one project, then putting something down on the floor, like a blanket, laying down on the floor, sleeping for a couple hours when an alarm set, so he could pop back up and then start working on another project. And then, so he went through months and months and months of his life, basically not getting any sleep, forcing himself not to sleep so that he could get all this work done. And at a certain point, he said, I can't really physically do that anymore because I'm getting older. So he decided that he needed to bide his time and structure his life a little more, which I think is why Williamson went later into television, which is what he does now primarily, is TV shows, more of a set schedule. But going to early 1999, when he was approached by the Weinsteins to write Scream 3, all he found time to do basically was develop a very detailed 20 to 30 page treatment for the film. Now I'm going to tell, do you guys know the original idea for Scream 3?
No, I don't. I know that the fella that's, billed as the screenwriter, Aaron Kruger, yeah. I'd only know his work, like one other film prior to Scream 3, and I was a huge fan of it. So I remember thinking like, man, I'm excited to see what twists and turns he can bring. But as far as like, no, I don't know.
I know they had to change a lot of things because of Columbine, and that's why it became more comedic.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't want violence and gore in it. Because I remember that was also an issue with, it was the same time, the Batman Return of the Joker animated film, and they actually had to change it. So if you read the comic book when it came out, it was different than the film. But then they eventually released the original version of the film on DVD years later. But at the time, they were really concerned with violence in films, and because they thought that's what was causing the shootings.
And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Williamson's original idea for Scream 3. And I think, Mike, you're going to like this because you told me that you're a big fan of Matt Lillard. Well, here's the deal with the original script for Scream 3, based on Williamson's idea. Originally, it was going to be set in Woodsboro again, not in Hollywood. And it was going to be a new stab film was going to be filming in the town where the original murders took place. You discover in the film that Stu Macher, one of the two villains in part one, actually survived the TV set being crashed down onto his head. And he went to prison. And so he's in prison the whole time. And Sidney is back on the set of this new stab movie. And we meet a bunch of new characters from Woodsboro High School, a new set of teenagers. And basically, Sidney winds up in another one of these situations where everybody's getting killed off. At the end of the movie, all the teenage characters have apparently been killed off in this final party scene. Sidney walks into the room, and all of the teenagers who she thought were dead actually stand up, revealing that none of them were killed, and that, in fact, all of them were the killers, and that they were a cult of people obsessed with the original Scream murder, led by Stu Macher from prison. And that Stu Macher in prison had also gotten Mrs. Loomis and Mickey together via the serial killer website, and that he had orchestrated what happened in part two as well. So what you discover is that Stu Macher is sort of the mastermind of everything that happened after the first Scream film.
That would have been great, but
I was going...
Stu is plausible as the mastermind.
That's an interesting point, that Stu would not be plausible as the mastermind. What do you think, Chaney?
Stu, no. I gotta say the idea is kind of intriguing, right? Because I had heard, I thought it was for maybe part 4 that they were considering bringing back Stu Macher, but I guess I had those wrong. And I at first I'm like, yeah, maybe he caught the TV. Maybe he just messed his face up a little bit. So it's plausible he could be alive, but I don't think he was ever like the brain, right, to orchestrate something like that. Well, hell, I guess what we know now, Billy wasn't even, he didn't orchestrate the events of part 1.
Right.
But I definitely don't think Stu would go to prison and kind of harden up and then become this cerebral, masterminded a way to continue this terror. I think he was based on the way Lillard played it. Now, I'm a huge Lillard fan also, love him. He did not seem like the killer who was calling the shots.
Yes. Yeah, I think
it's a fun ending, but it's not terror. It's not super plausible, by any stretch.
Well, and if it sounds familiar, this ending was not altogether scrapped by Williamson, because he took the idea of a cult of murderers being run by a man in prison and used it for a TV series starring Kevin Bacon called The Following. So he took that idea from Scream 3 and developed the TV show The Following out of it years later. So I think maybe that idea, and like I say, it is intriguing, but I think maybe that idea fit better in The Following. I would have liked to have seen more of Williamson's ideas being sort of used in Scream 3. As it turned out, none of the treatment practically that he wrote was used in Scream 3. When they hired Aaron Kruger to come in and write the actual script, he developed a whole new idea with Wes Craven. And his idea was, well, they were in high school in the first movie, then they're in college in the second. Well, they got to be someplace bigger in the third. And so they were like, let's send them to Hollywood. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Do you think that's why, I've always heard the fan base is split on 3. It's like a lot of, and also the whole, they're making a movie, it's a movie Hollywood, particularly this one because it's, they're in Hollywood. Did you sometimes think while watching it, oh, New Nightmare? Sometimes
yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, like, oh, this kind of reminds me a little bit of this, but not, you know what I'm saying.
It's a good point.
It makes sense that he dug that idea then.
Yes.
That bring of Hollywood into reality. It makes sense that he would like it.
And come to think of it,
Nightmare was exactly that.
Yeah.
You could connect those two very easily. That's a good point, Rebecca. Yeah. But as you said, Beck, Columbine happened, and not only did that change, their original concept for Scream 3, because I think one of the things the Weinstein said, okay, let's not do, is have high school students be killers. That's another reason why in Scream 3 all the killers are adults and all the victims are adults, because they were like, let's kind of not go the high school route. After what happened there. And for those of you who don't know, may not have been a part of our generation, Columbine was a school shooting that was a really big deal in April of 1999, in which a number of students were killed by 2 other students. So yes, Aaron Kruger, as you mentioned, Chaney, was the film that you admired Arlington Road?
Yes, sir. Yes.
I very much admire that film as well. And that film is unique for having a really, really good twist ending.
Yes.
Which when I heard he was going to be the writer for Scream 3, I was like, well, yeah, Arlington Road kind of, no pun intended, but kind of blew me away with that twist ending.
Yeah, right.
But because it's a very good movie. So I thought, okay, well, that's pretty good. But I have to say this. For me, one of the things that I missed the most in Scream 3 is Williamson himself. I think that Williamson had a certain light touch. I think that his use of dialogue, his ability to build character and to make them very easily seem relatable is something that's lost in the 3rd installment. I know that Aaron Kruger tried his hardest to mimic Williamson's style, and he found that a little bit difficult from time to time because, like he said, he said, well, I do my own original stuff. And when you do a sequel based on someone else's material, it's never going to be yours. So, and I think he had the added pressure of saying, well, this is a set series with a set sort of formula, for lack of a better term. The audience expects certain things, which was the case that Wes Craven made for the studio heads when they said, well, let's cut down the violence and, bump up the comedy. Wes Craven was like, well, look, if you're going to make a Scream movie, certain things have to happen. Mm-hmm. If you don't want that to happen, then make a different movie.
Right.
And so that was sort of the attitude he went in. And he fought for basically every stab that took place in Scream 3. It was because if you notice the movie does not have a lot of blood in it.
It really doesn't. I watched it twice yesterday, part 3. Watched it twice yesterday because I missed some of it the first time, so I hit play again. And I did. I realized that there's it pales in comparison to part 4 in terms of blood, because part 4 was wickedly more bloody than I remembered it when I saw it in the theaters. Wickedly more bloody, brutal even compared to part 3.
It's a night and day. Yeah.
Yes, big time.
Yeah. Another thing about this is part of me thinks I wish they had just waited a couple years and let Williamson do what he wanted to do the way he wanted to do it. I know Wes Craven really wanted to finish the trilogy by the turn of the millennium. He wanted to kind of be done with it. Uh-oh.
Is it really a trilogy, though?
Say what, Mike?
Is it really a trilogy, though?
Well, it's not anymore.
No, it's not.
That was the original idea. This was supposed to be the concluding chapter.
What do you think of that? I mean, that was supposed to be the end. Is that?
That's a beautiful discussion in itself, man. The trilogy.
Break the rules. I felt like they were going to break. I thought Sydney was finally going to at least get stabbed. Mm-hmm. Nope.
Yeah, and Dewey, man, you know what? It took 2 whole movies. I'm sorry, 3, because Dewey didn't make himself useful until part 3. Mm-hmm. And that's not. I'm not saying I don't like Dewey and that he wasn't trying to, but part 1 and 2, he shows up, gets cut to pieces, and you're left wondering, gee, is he alive? Part 3, he finally puts police training to work. When he's on the hill and the killer bunts up, he's behind Gale by the car. He pulls out a gun and lands almost every shot square in the chest from a far distance. I'm like, okay, there you go. And then he falls and fucks it up. I'm like, there it is. There it is. What was I thinking? The killer went out of his way not to kill him in part 3, man. He ran after people and would walk past Dewey and punch him, but stab an actor, chase the actor down. And then meanwhile, Dewey just got a slice and a punch, and he was wide open to be gutted the whole time. This is like, Dewey, what's going on? Do the bad guys just feel sorry for you now?
Well,
They're like, they'll just stab him once or twice. He ain't going nowhere.
You could even go down to the finale of the movie, too, where Gale and Dewey are at the mercy of the killer. And what does the killer do? Kill them? No, he ties them up.
I know.
And I guess...
Wow, their way to protect Dewey, man. They really do.
That's such a what do you call it? Austin Powers villain moment.
All of them.
Say that again, Mike?
I said, and this was the trilogy, or they set it up to be the trilogy, which is supposed to be the most violent of all. You know, main characters are supposed to die. Like, that's why I never, even long before there was ever a 4, I never accepted 3 as a trilogy.
Well, that's a good point, because some of the rules that Randy gives, they did bring Randy back sort of in the
wonderful
movie.
Monologue, too. I love that. I love his video, man. I love it all. But none of it really happened.
Yeah,
some of it did. But there was no bloodbath.
None of those rules that he was pointing out ever actually, especially in comparison to the previous 2, in which you could kind of go down and mark off, yep, that rule happened, and yep, that rule happened. Really, in 3, the rules are very brief, and maybe the rules felt a little more like Aaron Kruger rules. You know, I think if Williamson had wrote them, maybe it would have been a little more, you know.
But I do want to point out that he said, now, if this is simply another sequel, the same rules apply. And then he goes over the rules for a trilogy. So it almost gets you excited for a trilogy, but I think we were genuinely just in another sequel, and we were looking for the wrong rules.
And do you sometimes think that, you know, with the way horror movies, they're always pumping out another sequel, you just never believe it's the end? You're like, they're going to keep making these things. Don't tell me this is the last one. I don't believe you. That's
what I was afraid of when I watched the movie, actually, because a big deal was made in the 90s that it's going to be, this is going to be a 3-movie deal, and that's it. And, you know, we'll hold off on Scream 4 and how many years passed. But many years passed, and you did kind of think for a while, oh, maybe it was a trilogy. I wasn't really that thrilled in how it ended, but maybe I didn't. No, it wasn't a trilogy. It was just another sequel. I do want to point out, though, a couple of things about the movie. It was constantly, like Scream 2, it was constantly being rewritten as they were shooting. Sometimes it was even being rewritten by filming and then reshooting the scenes that they filmed, which is a weird way of doing, very expensive way of rewriting.
Yeah, I heard they like shot like how many epilogues? Was it several?
There were a number of epilogues. There were a number of
to match like the various endings they were going to do or something. Was that okay? Because I'd heard that and I was kind of like, that sounds so unorganized. Don't do that.
Well, the thing about the opening of the movie. The opening of the movie with Liev Schreiber returning as Cotton Weary and getting killed. Actually, when I was sitting in the movie theater watching the first 10 minutes, I was like, oh, this is going to be good. It's just going to be good. And then, you know, the title came up and then we started going a little bit. And I was like, okay, I'm buying into this. But I'll tell you the moment when Scream 3 went off the rails for me the first time I watched it. There's a scene where Sidney lays down on the couch. And then we cut to a shot outside the house, and you see this woman with her face painted white, and she's walking up, and suddenly you go, as soon as it cut to that shot of the ghostly mother walking up, I went, this doesn't feel like a Scream movie.
Yeah, what the hell is it? There's such a tone adjustment with that. Yeah. I said it last, because that one particular bit, the frame of the mother standing there, it's creepy, it's scary as shit. Like, she's like, Sid, you know, I'm like, oh, that's creepy. I'm like, what? This isn't a ghost story. Well, I mean, I guess kind of. I was like, but it throws the movie off a little bit. Like the tone has changed when you see the ghost of the mother. It threw me off quite a bit.
I started to get a little nervous, sort of feeling in my stomach, going, this feels a lot like one of those 80s Wes Craven movies that I could make like 5 minutes through and then had to turn off. It wasn't quite that bad, but I did not like all the ghostly mother stuff. And the lines written for the mother where she was always like, come, Sidney, come to mother, come to mommy. And it's like, this doesn't feel like a Scream movie. This feels like something else.
I think they threw that in there as like a wink to what's going to come on later in the story. Like, oh, that's right. Her mom's going to play a pivotal role in this plot. So, yeah, we need to remind everybody that Sydney's mom was murdered 2 movies ago.
Like,
exactly.
You know, keep to bring it back up. And
yeah, what did you say, Mike?
I said, as if anyone could possibly forget.
Right.
Mom died.
Yeah, and I'm glad that the actress who played the mother in the picture frame got to come back and do some acting, but I'm not quite sure that was the way of doing it. Maybe a little bit more flashbacky type stuff and not so much as...
That was like Kruger's way of giving Sydney some depth, like, to what ghosts she's dealing with, like what scares her, what keeps her in isolation aside from the fear of psychos. Maybe that, but I think that it was only a tool for that, I think, to bring you closer to Sydney, to flesh, because she doesn't have a lot of lines or doesn't have a lot of dialogue up until like the last 30, 40 minutes. She's really not in it that much.
And I'm glad you bring that up, because it allows me to talk about something that was a problem and creatively, which was that Neve Campbell at this point had kind of started to get tired of Scream and was a little afraid of being typecast as Sydney. So part of her contract for Scream 3 is that she would only be available half the time they were shooting. So they shot for a little over 2 months, and she was only there for 20 days, which required for them to write Gail and Dewey into more of the movie and minimize Sydney, which is why Sydney is not in a lot of the movie until you get nearer the end, the finale. I don't think that necessarily helps the film either, especially considering that the trilogy is Sydney's story, Good for Courtney Cox and David Arquette. By this time, they were married. In the first film they met, the second film they were dating, and by the third film they had married. Thing about it is, here is one of my biggest gripes about both Scream 3 and Scream 4. I really like the Gale Weathers character in the first 2. In part 3, something happens with Gale Weathers where she suddenly becomes like this cartoon version of a TV reporter. She's no longer a believable character to me. And I'm not just talking about the weird Cleopatra hair. I'm talking about just the character itself. It just didn't play. It played like a really bad Nancy Drew sort of thing. And I'm like, that's not Gale. Gale is like the spunky reporter who's always like trying to kick ass to get to the story. And here she's just kind of saying goofy lines. And granted, nowhere near as bad as like the Jenny McCarthy scene, which is laughably horrible. Jenny McCarthy, bless her heart, can't act her way out of a wet paper sack.
No, she can't. That was a huge misfire, man. I'm honestly, I have no idea who the hell thought, let's bring Jenny McCarthy in here.
Yeah, that was
at the time she was very popular in the 90s, but even then I'm like, what? She acts like in regular movies? I had no idea. It's distracting kind of too, also.
It is kind of distracting. And again, it's kind of like one of the weaknesses of 3 was, and I hate to keep beating up on it because it has its virtues, the movie. I'm not saying it's totally terrible. I'm just saying that for me, it's nowhere near my favorite. In fact, it's probably bottom on the list of the 4 for me. But the cast in 1 and 2 it was just full of up and coming actors who were very talented, each one. 3, can you really point to? Parker Posey was already established.
Brother.
Emily Mortimer wasn't quite yet. She's got some good stuff since.
Good
but
point.
She's the only one.
I'm glad you brought up Parker Posey.
She was already indie like gold at that point, though. She was pretty popular at that point, indie wise.
What we say, Mike?
Who plays the killer? Sydney's brother.
Foley, Scott Foley.
I had never seen him prior to that, and I
Me
really,
neither, dude.
I liked him a lot. I thought he stood out to me in this movie. There were a lot of disappointments for me as such a big fan of the Scream series with this particular movie, and for me, it also ranks at the bottom of them. It's still one of the Screams. I'll still watch it. There's still parts I love, but as far as standout role, he was really the only standout role to me.
You know what? I'll second that. When I watched it, I liked him. up until his supposed, his fake death.
Yeah.
I did not much care for Mr. Foley's angry killer, like his the confessing of it all.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't buy into it, but I liked him up to that point. I was like, who is this guy? He's kind of funny. I'm like, who is he? Oh, he's dead now. It doesn't matter. Oh, he's the killer. Sweet. His anger didn't take me, man. He reminded me of and I love Timothy Oliphant, man. I really do. Huge fan. I didn't care for his killer either. Mm-hmm. It seemed spazzy to me. And Foley, I just feel like they made this story where he's the long lost brother, right? And where he's gunning it to her. He gives her the backstory and says, God damn it, everything you had that was supposed to be mine, I didn't buy it. I'm like, oh, you fucking whiner. Like, I'm like, I don't buy it. Even with Stu and Billy, and I think it's the only time in the series, when their intentions came to light, of course you don't agree with them, but it was believable. And plus you had like, they countered each other. One guy was completely obnoxious and the other guy was, very stern and stoic. Foley, man, I wanted to, and I dig his comedic work. Scott Foley, not Scott Foley. Yes, Scott Foley, not Dave Foley. Scott Foley. I dig his comedic work, but when shit hit the fan, I wasn't scared or bothered, and I didn't much care about his reasons. Didn't much care. I understand the pain of a long lost brother, but there wasn't enough conversation there. There was no character once he was revealed.
Even the few times that he snapped, like I remember him getting really worked up. They're trying to kill my movie. Like it was very believable. He looked like a director that was super upset, and I'm with you. I bought everything until the killer monologue, and that seemed forced and out of character.
And that could be chalk it up to the blocking, whatever it was. They were just standing in place. It's hard to have that conversation, something so worked up without movement, but I wouldn't know how to fix it. I'm just saying, I was like, damn, this is who we got. There's only one killer, man.
And that was one of the things that they went back and kind of tweaked a little bit after the fact, was they thought in the original version of the script that Sidney defeated him too easily. And so they went back in and they actually increased the violence of the fight that they have. And they added in all the stuff where he kind of beats her up and strangles her and then shoots her. But of course, the twist is, she's wearing a bulletproof vest that she got out of the police station, which I've noticed a lot of people don't understand what the bulletproof vest is because it's such a thrown off thing. You have one scene where she looks over at a door and the bulletproof vest is in the shot. But a lot of people don't remember that, So at the end, when she's suddenly wearing a bulletproof vest, I know a couple of people I talked to were like, where did she get the vest from? And I'm like, well, you remember when she was talking in the thing, she looks over and for like a split second, you see a bulletproof.
What I guess 2 days at the police station, like when she was filming, Like it had to be the police station unless she traveled there in it.
Yeah. Exactly. But anyway, that was something I think you guys have kind of hit on all of my criticisms about the ending. So I won't kind of go over it again. But I mean, I was not a huge fan. There was a soap opera sort of aspect to the long lost brother that I didn't like. Didn't seem to fit.
And couldn't agree.
And can I bring up one more?
It was such a stretch. Just too much.
It's like days of our lives.
Bothered me. We've touched on, but we haven't actually talked about directly.
Mm-hmm.
Why the hell are we using guns?
Well, that was another thing. Well, that's a good point because
he's a slasher.
Yeah. She put on a vest like she's worried about getting shot at.
Like, I don't like that at all. I didn't like the gunplay in a slasher film.
And if they were worried about Columbine, why would you put guns?
Right.
Great point.
The first time gun comes in, like, come on.
Well,
Patrick Warburton too. He's one of my favorite supporting actors.
Yeah.
It's always hard to watch him die because I thought that he's a giant. He's a linebacker. Like he's going to put up a decent fight. No, he didn't. He got taken out very easily
with a frying pan.
Yes, that always hurt my feelings. I'm like, he's too big to die this way.
Well, I think. I can go ahead and tell you guys about how this turned out in terms of the gross. After all the reshoots and everything, the movie came out actually a month after they finished some of the reshoots. So it was a little bit of a rushed deal near the end. It wound up grossing not very much compared to the other ones, 89 million, which was 20 million less than Scream 2. It was made for 40, which was almost double what Scream 2 cost. So, you know, I would say it was a moderate success. A couple years had passed since Scream 2. If they had made this movie in 1998, like I said, they could have done the Williamson version of it, and it might have been even more successful because it was right fresh off of Scream 2. As it wasn't a bad, gross for a movie, for a third film. Obviously, it was supposed to be the end of a trilogy. The very last shot of the movie quite literally leaves the door open for another film. I don't think it was a subtle point they were making. That
it was just so annoying.
Yeah.
So annoying. And also, I got an issue with the, every other movie that, I mean, I'm sure there's some that's not, but every other slasher flick where there's a cop involved, like, why did they let Dempsey live?
Well,
he didn't need to. Like, if we're talking body count, we want some blood for a trilogy.
Well,
the cop shouldn't have.
Did you know that actually the cop originally wasn't even in the ending?
Okay. Well, it makes no sense why he would be.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, yeah.
What
the hell's he doing? Are they
one of their billions of shot endings?
Yes, they went back. The original.
Still in the town. Call him.
The original ending of 3 was that you had, everything happened with the brother and all that stuff, but Dempsey wasn't there at all. And then they looked at the movie and they were like, well, I mean, where did that character go? He just disappeared. So they were like,
at Sydney's house now.
Yeah, he's hanging at Sydney's house, waiting for her to come home. Yeah. And even as Rebecca was saying, the shot endings, the epilogue was shot several times because they were thinking, well, should he be at the house with them? Should he have a sling on his arm? Should he not have a sling?
He had a bandage in one at one point.
Yeah.
When they shot.
They used eventually the one where he was there and he had a sling on his arm. But, this is part of the thing. And I'm about to move off of Scream 3 and on to 4. But I just want to say in closing that this is one of the things that's really odd to me about some of the later movies is, you figure out this stuff when you're scripting it. You don't shoot it, spend a lot of money, then go back, reshoot it a few different times just to see which works the best. And I think going into now Scream 4, one of Wes Craven's big requirements for the 4th film was this. He said that I want to have a script finished before I start shooting, which may not sound like a unreasonable request. But considering the experience he had on the previous 2 films was apparently a tough request. And he also said, I want the script to be written by Kevin Williamson. That was another one of his requirements. 8 years had passed between Scream 3 and Scream 4. So almost a decade. Actually, there was more than 8 years when it came out, but when they started talking about it, 8 years had passed by the time they started talking about a 4. I don't know why they started talking about a 4. I guess the Weinsteins just looked at it and were like, well, now's maybe the time for another Scream. We're looking at these marketing reports and they're saying, hey, maybe we're ready for another Scream. There is, I won't go into this too much because, we don't have time really to talk about it. But in between Scream 3 and 4, Williamson and Wes Craven had worked on a werewolf movie called Cursed. Also for Dimension. Oh,
God, yeah.
That was another
nightmare. Yeah.
That was another situation where a script was written, a whole movie was made. Then they looked at it and Dimension didn't like anything in the movie. So they went back, rewrote the whole thing, reshot the entire movie with an almost completely different cast. This was a Dimension thing. The Dimension was kind of known for making movies, looking at them. Oh, I don't like that. Let's remake it all over again.
Why couldn't they do that with Phantoms then?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Why didn't they do that with Phantoms?
It's amazing how, Scream survived that. The original Scream actually had a finished script. They made the script. There wasn't a lot of cuts made other than to get an R rating, for some of the violence. Somehow it survived, but that was the only version of the series that survived, because even though Wes Craven said, these are my demands for 4, none of them were met, basically. Williamson had a finished script. That much has happened. But they did not have final cut. When they started shooting on Scream 4, Williamson had to go back to a TV show that he had worked on that he was very proud of and was very successful, called The Vampire Diaries.
Yeah.
So he only
had... A friend of mine is one of the leads on that show, or was one of the leads on that show, man. Is
that right?
Good guy, yeah.
Very successful show that Williamson had developed. And so after working on Scream 4 for the summer, he jumped back into Vampire Diaries come fall. Problem was, the Weinsteins wanted rewrites. And so Williamson wasn't there. So who do they bring in for rewrites? Aaron Kruger from Part 3. So, maybe that was part of Williamson's thing about, oh man, why can't I just catch a break? We'll talk after we discuss 4 about Williamson's overall view of the series. But so,
can I? This was the first one that didn't they use CGI in this one, like on the knife?
All the knife blades were CGI'd,
which looked kind of.
Yeah. So when people get stabbed, they're just getting stabbed with a handle, and they put the blade in later.
As if they're going to need, like, that's a big risk considering, like, we need to get a reaction out of Jenny McCarthy.
Right, exactly.
Okay, maybe that's why I didn't believe the deaths in Part 3.
Well, in Part 3 it was still knives. In Part 4.
Okay, Part 4 then. Okay, my fault. I misunderstood. Oh.
Yeah, but let's talk about a little bit of the cast for 4. You had Emma Roberts, otherwise known as Julia Roberts' niece.
Eric Roberts' daughter.
That's right, Eric Roberts' daughter, playing Sidney's cousin, Jill. You had Rory Culkin, Macaulay's brother.
It's like a family affair.
It is.
All the old A-listers family.
And he plays sort of the new Randy, a character named Charlie. My personal favorite, I think she kills it in this movie, is Hayden Panettiere.
Yep. Couldn't agree more, man. Steals it entirely.
She is so amazing in this movie. Perfectly cast as Kirby, kind of the spunky girl. She knows just as much about movies as Charlie does, if not more. And for a moment watching it, you go, that's like Scream 1 and 2 casting. Where it's like, yeah, that's perfect. Not that the other actors are bad. The other teenage actors, quote unquote teenage actors, are very good. Emma Roberts is good up until a point. And I will talk about that particular point, but she's very good as Jill. Now, one of the things that I was on the set of You're Next. We were filming You're Next when Scream 2 came out in theaters in 2011.
Scream 2 or Scream?
Oh, I'm sorry, Scream 4. Thank you.
Okay.
Scream 4. Okay. When it came out in theaters. And I went to see it with Lane Hughes, who plays the Fox Mass Killer in You're Next. And some other cast members went to see it separately. And I was sitting there and I started watching the movie. And it was sort of like Scream 3. I was watching it and the opening was so clever in how it's like one opening stacked on top of another opening, stacked on top of another opening, and you go, this is a Kevin Williamson idea. Like, already I feel like I'm in better hands than Scream 3, And it's great. You had Lucy Hale in there, you had Anna Paquin in there, you had Kristen Bell in there, and then they were all like the opening scene victim. You just killed one after another after another. Very clever opening. And the movie started, and I did not have that moment like in Scream 3 where I went, oh, God, we've gone off the rails. There was no ghost mother that made me go, oh, jeez. I actually really like Scream 4. Maybe I liked it even more because 3 was such a disappointment, and because we had been, there had been such a passage of time, 10 years between the two coming out, and because Scream 4 came out in 2011. I really liked it. I thought that Sidney as a character evolved really well. I loved who she was now. You know, she wasn't hiding in the closet anymore, up in the woods somewhere. She could kick ass because there's the one scene the killer's coming up the stairs and she just throws a straight front kick and just knocks his ass down the stairs. And yeah, of course she would have learned to fight. I mean, of course, yeah. After all the shit she's been through. And, you know, the only thing, again, I think Gail was a cartoon. I was kind of hoping more for the Gail in 1 and 2.
She was a cartoon like wife this time, you know. She was kind of treated as that. Like she spent most of the time just trying to have a say in the like investigation. You know, even though he's like, hey, you know, I'm a cop now, and she's unemployed or whatever.
Yeah, and she has weird lines that you don't imagine the Gail from the original one saying. Like, I think at one point she's telling Dewey, well, get on the Gail train or don't do it at all, you know, and you're like, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense. What do you think? Do you guys think it was the acting? Did something go off the rails with Courtney Cox's acting as Gail? Was it the script?
I think it's the script, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Really? Because she was very good in the first two.
Yeah. There's a small subtlety to me that sticks out in my mind with 4, where I could tell we were in slightly different hands, and it's the scene where they're showing the film in the barn.
Yes.
That scene, when it first starts, you get this feeling in the pit of your stomach, sorry, some shit's about to happen here. And so when you leave the barn and it's not as chaotic as you expected, like, I don't know, it felt like, I mean, it was almost a good twist that I didn't know when it was coming anymore, but at the same time, it lost its familiarity to it.
I agree. I think that's the only thing that went wrong with Gail Weathers. I think her acting was on point in terms of like she took the script and she made of it what she could. But I think if Williamson, he did write this, right? He wrote parts.
I have to tell you this much. He did write the script for part 4, which was rewritten by Aaron Kruger. The whole stabathon in the barn was not in Williamson's script.
Okay.
That whole thing was added by Aaron Kruger.
I don't like the barn sequence. I feel like the third may have been like, they may see it as a failure. So now all of a sudden we find ourselves back in high school in like an original setting, and they're taking everything from part 1. They even got poor Culkin at the end, even doing Lillard's lines, you know, like he was there and shit. So I'm like, get it up, get it. I'm like it feels like they tried to go back to the best, and that's what this one was built on. Let's take it back to part 1. We're back in high school. We're, you know, here we are. We got high school kids killing again. But it doesn't do anything to evolve the characters, because they all find themselves right back in that situation. And I agree with you, LC. I love, my favorite part about 4 is where Sydney is in her life. I like that she's open about it, and even dealing with the killers in the kitchen at the end. Even she's tired of it. You know, she's like, dude, it don't matter. It's, you know, you're going to fuck up. She's not like she is in part 1, because she's learned. So little things about it were good. I just the throwback to part 1, I think they made some misfires. And the Emma Roberts, I enjoy her work more often than not, but again, it was a psycho thing. I didn't much care for the psycho behavior when all the shit hit the fan and all is revealed. Didn't quite dig it. Didn't quite buy it.
That is my biggest criticism, is when you find out that Jill is one of the 2 killers in Scream 4. I mean, suddenly her acting, which was so good, suddenly became this thing of, I'm evil. Can't you tell by how I'm talking?
Exactly.
And it's like, it would have been
very Lifetime.
It would have been
she was very young at the time, and she's done some really good stuff. But I mean, it's same with Oliphant, just a misfire, man.
I agree. I think Emma Roberts has gone on to do some really good stuff on television, especially. But in this movie, it's one of those things where it's just like, I don't know. It's just to me, it's an actor trying to play evil. It doesn't seem it to me.
Yeah.
It would have been better had she just acted like Jill. I think in some ways it would have been creepy if she had just acted the way she had acted before, only now she's stabbing people. You know?
And the other killer would have to thereby, like, he would have to. The best part about Wonder were how both killers seem so different, but we're in on it together. You know, I love that dynamic. There's one evil and there's one that's a little nutty. They're both crazy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't there.
And all of this is from Williamson's original script. That's the way, those were the killers that he wanted in it, unlike in Scream 2 when, they had to change it because the script leaked. Another thing that's straight up Williamson, and I love it, is when Hayden Panettiere is doing the Drew Barrymore thing, and she, he's asking her which reboot is, and she cuts him off and just reels through the chronologically in order.
In the movie right there. That's the best acting in the movie, I think, is that scene.
When I was watching that, I was just like, that is a great scene. Like, that's perfect. And then I got the disappointment of her getting stabbed, like about 30 seconds later. And I was thinking, well, they could Dewey's been stabbed 15 times by now. Gail's been stabbed 5. They can bring her back.
She was the fiery guitar solo of that film. Like, she really brought it home, man.
And I want to ask all three of you this. This is something, I'll tell you my opinion after I get your opinions. Scream 4, by the time we get to Scream 4, those 3 lead characters, Dale, I keep wanting to call him Dale, I'm combining their names, Gail, Dewey, and Sidney. Are they too protected?
Absolutely.
Are the filmmakers protecting them too much?
Absolutely.
Big time. They wanted another movie somewhere down the pike.
The fact that none of those 3 died in the trilogy bothered me, that they called it a trilogy, and then with the 4th one, it once again just proved, like, it's almost annoying how protected they are. One of them should have died by now. You put them on Grey's Anatomy and all 4 of them would be dead in the first season.
Right.
It's got a point. Yeah.
But these 3 cannot die. Like, come on.
They are protected. Yes, very much. That's a good point.
That would have been a nice moment in the movie if you're going to have the stab-a-thon. I thought, kill Gail.
Yes.
Right. In there. Like, she should have died right there, man. That would not have just blown up some skirts, dude. No one would have saw that coming. Major character right in the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
Ooh, man, that'd be great.
Or you killed Dewey and made her character better.
Or either one. Somebody's got to go.
No, I'm teasing.
You can mark my words, man. One of those 3 are in on being the bad guy.
If you kill Dewey or Gail, the other can become the bad guy.
Well, that's another thing. I was sitting here watching Scream 4, and at one point I turned to Lane Hughes, who was with me, and I said, you know how I hope this ends? I hope Sidney is the killer. And he looked at me like, I would never expect it if that happened. But of course that doesn't happen, because there were a couple moments in the movie. There were a couple moments in the movie when I thought to myself, like, Sidney could possibly be the killer in this. It is a possibility. And maybe they were trying to sort of suggest that as red herring. Obviously, they weren't going to go that way. If they're not going to kill any of the main characters, they're not going to make one of them the killer, But I really think that Gail should have gone out at the old stab-a-thon. Yeah, I think the one thing they keep forgetting with these films is Randy. Yeah. Nobody expected Randy to die suddenly in Scream 2. Nobody. And he did. And when he did, it blew everyone out of their chair.
It was amazing.
I'm still mad about it. It was necessary, but it still affects me because, you just didn't see it coming. There hasn't been one of those kills yet since then.
After part 1, he was the fan favorite character. People loved all the rest of them, but they really loved Randy, played by Jamie Kennedy. We need another Randy moment in this series, but so far we haven't gotten it. Originally, this was meant to be a new trilogy, the first part of a new trilogy. And like with the first film, Williamson wrote treatments for part 5 and 6 when he turned in the script for part 4. His original ending of 4 actually was Jill kind of gets a she gets away with it.
Seeds in it, right? Yeah, I'd read that. I just read that. Yeah.
She kind of gets away with it. She's being put into the ambulance, and then someone yells out, "We have a survivor. There's another survivor," suggesting that it's Sydney, and that the film was going to end like that. Studio didn't like the idea of a cliffhanger, so they were like, "Yeah, let's wrap this up." And so that's how you ended up with, the ending that you have with the finale written by Aaron Kruger in the hospital. Where there's the big showdown and a lot of bedpans. Dewey's getting punched around, with bedpans and silly shit. And
that makes sense.
Yeah. Sydney had a great line though, where she's talking about one rule of remakes is don't fuck with the original. I was like, yeah, that's a good line. I like that line. Because I happen to agree with it in real life. But other than that, kind of silly. Roberts is in full I'm a bad girl acting mode.
Oh.
It's just now I'm in a hospital.
About it, like nothing scary about it. When I saw it in the theater, man, I didn't watch it again for like maybe a year or two. It did not grab me. I didn't care when we left. I'm like, oh, okay. Dewey lived again.
I'll be honest.
Dewey's still alive.
I wouldn't have known that it was a real Scream movie had it not had Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, and David Arquette in it.
I thought you were going to say if it didn't have a title card Scream.
I mean,
yeah.
I would have felt like it was just another cheesy remake if it didn't have the original cast. But that was the only thing to me that really made it feel like a Scream movie because I don't know. It got so dissociated over the years from what it originally was, which was a scary movie. This wasn't scary.
Oh, go ahead, Chaney.
Like you were saying about Williamson's writing, who he kind of reminds me of and what part 3 really lacked. What he reminds me of like a Joss Whedon. He has kind of a gift for writing really clever, like really funny dialogue that's not only funny, but it can flesh out your character all in a conversation. Like you give off information. It's clever, it's fun. Which, not to change the subject, but like Joss Whedon wrote the first 2 Avengers films; those were great, and then the one that after it suffered, but only because his writing wasn't in it. It's a touch. They really should have allotted him time to finish up his trilogy. Because that's the only way to keep it his vision. Is the only way.
And for 4, he finished the script. Just do the script. You know what I mean? He had time to finish it. He finished it. Wes Craven wanted to do his finished script. That was the deal. It probably would have been a much better movie 4, even though I do like it.
Meddling.
Exactly. I like it better than 3, but I just would have liked to have seen, Wes and Williamson do one like the original, where nothing was changed.
They should have worked around him, but I mean, this is, Weinstein, the studios, and they want to make money. They just want to bank. So they didn't care. This is why Williamson was sleeping for just a few hours trying to get project. I mean, the pressure they put on him. Give us our movie. They didn't want to give him the time, so they subbed it out to Kruger, and it suffered.
Yeah. I agree.
It suffered.
And it has some
shit. Like they caused the studio's the reason that the movies are odd. Part 3 is odd.
Dimension has kind of a real, or at least at that time had a real problem with this sort of thing in terms of meddling and things like that. There are some really good jokes in 4, and there are some really clunky jokes in 4. There's, like the Anthony Anderson playing Deputy Anthony Perkins, which I thought was kind of funny. The scene where he gets stabbed through the forehead by the killer, based on something Wes Craven had seen in some medical documentary he had seen where someone had gotten stabbed through the forehead and lived for a period of time. And then he has this like really awkward fuck Bruce Willis line as he falls. And I'm like, okay, that was not funny. That's actually kind of cringy. It
goes over. It goes. I mean, that joke won't land because when they are talking about Bruce Willis earlier, like the 2 cops in the car, it had been so long we forgot that's what they said, so it just comes out of nowhere. And I watched it twice. It's the only reason I caught it. and realize the reference. And no, it doesn't play. I don't think it plays.
Yeah, it doesn't land at all. But stuff like that, I think could have been smoothed over. The film was released in April the 11th, 2011. And like I said, I watched it. So it has a kind of a special place in my heart because I was doing a movie at the time that I really enjoyed the whole process of doing that film. And so this is kind of sort of an integral part is going to see this film. So that might have sort of colored my opinion a little bit. I watched it again preparing for this show, enjoyed it even more than I remembered. And I kind of had that opinion. As much as I dislike 3, I'll give you this. Watching it by itself, I enjoyed a little more than I remembered. I think the problem comes when you watch 1, 2, and 3 together, and 3 is like this sore thumb that sticks out as not being anywhere near as good. Yeah. Now, the movie Scream 4, as I said, was released. It made only $38 million on a $40 million budget domestically. So we're talking a huge drop in return even from Part 3. So maybe the Weinstein's reports they were looking at saying, I think it's time for another Scream, maybe they were not entirely accurate because the movie did not perform well. That said, they did go on to make a MTV television series based on Scream, which came out in 2015. So, 4 years after Scream 4. Whenever I think of that, I think I watched the first season of that, but whenever I think of it, I just think of that mask that looked sort of like a sex doll, because it had the round hole in it.
Threw me off.
I think your mask, I think you looked better as a ghost, Chaney, in Haunt by far than the ghost in the Scream series. Now, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Part 3, or season 3, I think they brought back the traditional ghost face costume.
I never watched the actual the series show. I never watched it.
I got pretty into the show season 1, but by season 2, I dwindled off.
Yeah, I like I said, I watched 1. I thought that's interesting. It was short. It was not a long season, so it's not like there was this huge dedication of time. It has nothing to do with the movies, by the way.
No.
It's totally different.
Well, yeah, I didn't pretend much interest in it because it had nothing to do with the movies.
And I think maybe it would have helped the series more if it had at least been set in the same universe as the movies, and use the ghost mask and do the whole thing and just say this is something that's going on somewhere else, or maybe even set it in Woodsboro. Who knows? I think that would have maybe helped the story a little bit. But again, they were not asking me.
It was a show they banked off the popularity of the name Scream.
Yep.
That was the goal.
But it was very a Pretty Little Liars type thing.
Yes. Lucy Hale, that's my girl.
Yeah.
I watched Pretty Little Liars.
Me too, and I like that, and I like what's the we just started on Ridgewood or Riverdale.
Yes. The Archie comic one, yeah.
Kind of vibes, but don't call it Scream.
Yeah,
I went to a TV show called Elm Street, and then just do like Pretty Little Liars vibes. That would be weird.
Well, the thing about the Scream series that I think we lost Chaney there for he's back.
Sorry, yeah, no, my phone rang. Some idiot.
So Scream went for 3 series, or as they say in the UK, 3 seasons, as we say here, and was moderately successful. Was not a huge hit, and I don't think there will be a season 4, but there will be a Scream 5, as was recently announced. Blumhouse is going to be reviving the Scream series with yet another sequel. Williamson had nothing to do with the television show. Williamson is really into television, but when it came time to do a Scream TV show, he was like, hell no, I'm not doing that. In fact, after Scream 4, he was like, hell no, I'm not doing 2 more of them. At first, he was all in. But after being rewritten yet again by Aaron Kruger and that whole process, it was like, no, I'm walking away. The word is that Williamson has something to do with the story for Scream 5. Whether that means he's writing it or whether that means he just might have given them an idea or two, I don't know. I do know David Arquette is the only actor from the originals that's officially signed on to the new film. Nev Campbell, I think they're talking to, and who knows about Courtney Cox. Thing about it is, there's no Wes Craven. So is it even worth reviving without Wes? What do you think?
I would just find a different original story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
just and work off that.
Maybe if you can get Williams to be very involved with it, but I don't see how you do a Scream without Courtney Cox. I mean, even if she's gonna die in the opening credits, finally, I don't think you can do Scream without Sidney Prescott.
And who knows? She might come back. I mean, it's in all likelihood she could. The release date for Scream 5 right now is tentatively set for 2021, depending on how this whole COVID thing goes with productions. And God knows we know all about that, don't we, Chaney?
Oh, yeah.
But I think Blumhouse is, that's maybe good hands for it. I mean, if anybody was going to be doing it, this will not be a Weinstein production, so maybe there'll be less meddling.
Yes.
If you have a really talented person involved as a director, and if Williamson is not going to write it, you better have a really good writer who can do something with the material and not be so protective of the characters. Because we have to remember, this isn't a TV show. This is a film series. So you can kill some of these people if you want.
Absolutely can. Yes.
Who do you think could pull off the directing for this?
I was just thinking that, man, in my head. I'm going through names, and I don't know. We want like a young guy with fresh eyes, or we want like a veteran, a guy that understands like the genre and like the idea of a series of horror films, or do you want a guy with a completely fresh take?
I feel like you got to go with someone with an old school vibe, like.
I agree. I think if there's one film to pull John Carpenter back into film, it'd be this. But I also wouldn't want to compare his shit to, I don't want it to be like Wes Craven's is better than his or his was better. I don't want that at all. They have their own series. They're good, Yeah. But somebody with his attention to that kind of character detail, I think somebody could take it back to the good roots of like a slasher flick. Carpenter could, but I would prefer somebody different, not such a veteran.
Well, I'm very interested in hearing what kind of names get floated around and who is eventually confirmed for it, because it is apparently happening. We'll just have to see. And when that film eventually comes out, we'll do another one of these and we'll talk about Scream 5. But as for now, we've reached the end of our show about Scream 3 and 4. I think we've managed to cover a lot of material. Obviously, doing 2 movies in 1 hour is is always kind of a tall order, but hey, we managed it. I want to thank you guys for joining in this discussion. Mike Bama, thank you. Yep, and Ghostface and little Mike Bama there. I want to thank Rebecca, as always, and Chaney. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you for having me, man.
And until next time, I want you all out there to stay healthy and take care of yourselves.